This is the Comics Alternative, episode 192. Reviews of Limbo, Weird Detective #1, and Control #1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this week's episode, we're going to be looking at 3 titles, each of which is different in its own way, but they're all linked in very significant ways. We're going to begin with Dan Waters and Caspar Wijngaard's Limbo. After that, we're going to look at the first issue of Fred Van Lente and Guiu Vilanova's Weird Detective. And then we're going to wrap up with Control #1, written by Andy Diggle and Angela Cruickshank, with art by Andrea Mutti. But before we get to those comics, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some wonderful specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that are more impressive than that.
And to get your summer started off right, it's probably a good idea to get some bundles from DCB Service, and you'll find lots of bundles from your favorite publishers. You'll find this month of June, a Valiant bundle with the 10 newest Valiant titles for 50% off, a new Vertigo bundle with the 8 newest Vertigo titles for 50% off, and plenty of other bundles there as well. You just have to go to the website and see what they have.
That's right. That's Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Yes.
So, Andy, as we record this, we are getting ready to go to Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's this coming weekend, June 17th through the 19th, and unlike last year, you're not going to be here.
Yeah, we just had too many things going on this summer, and I wish I was going to be able to make it there, but I know you guys are going to have a great time, and I look forward to hearing of all the people that you're going to talk to while you're there and see what you picked up there.
Yeah, and Kunka and I announced this on last week's episode, but I want to tell our listeners again that if you plan on going to Heroes Con, and you definitely should if you're in the area, or even if you're not in the area, it's well worth the trip. We're going to be at table 105 in Artist's Alley. Last year, we were around the 400s. I went to look that up, and so this time around, we're a little closer to the left side of the area as you come down the escalator. So, I don't know. I hope this is a good location. I don't know. I remember this is almost around where Craig Yo was last year, and he seemed to really enjoy where he was telling me. So I hope to get a lot of traffic. I hope to meet a lot of people. And if you, again, listeners, are going to be in the area, be sure to look for us in Artist Alley, table 105.
Yeah, I wish I could go, but I really do encourage listeners who have not contacted us before. And last year, Derek, one of the great things about being there was so many people came up to the table, so many people that were regular listeners that said, "Hey, I listen to you guys all the time." And then also it was cool to meet people that would say, "Oh, I don't know about you guys, but I want to know more. Tell me more."
Yeah. So yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting people who not only have listened to us before, but people who will become new listeners. And Andy, if you decide at the last minute that you want to drive down to Charlotte, I still have a ticket for you.
Well, I will keep that in mind. That's very tempting.
But for now, let's begin looking at the titles for this week, and we're going to begin with the trade Limbo. This is written by Dan Waters with art by Caspar Wijngaard, and I guess I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Wijngaard is spelled Wijngaard. This is from Image Comics, and this was originally a 6-issue miniseries, which wrapped up earlier this year, and now we get the entire story in trade. Now, Andy, did you read this in individual issues, or did you wait until it was released in trade?
I waited until it was in trade. I remember seeing this in the previews catalog when it was solicited and thinking this sounds really like something I'd enjoy because I really like noir comics. And I decided to wait for the trade to come out since this was going to be a limited series. What about you, Derek? Did you read it individually?
I read the first issue of Limbo when it first came out, and I think that was sometime last year, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought, okay, this is interesting, but I don't know if it piqued my interest enough to get me to read the second and third issue. I mean, I ultimately didn't read the second, third, and the rest. But I think it may have been more a matter of time than me just opting out because I didn't like the first issue. I do remember my experience reading the first issue is that this is wild. I'm not too sure what's going on. And now that I've read the entire story, I still feel like this is wild. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but in a good way. I mean, when you have that feeling after the first issue, that's one thing. When you have that feeling at the end of the entire run, that's not necessarily a good thing. Although ultimately I do like Limbo, and it is a confusing story, and maybe we can begin by, well, without giving away spoilers, and there's a lot here to potentially spoil. I'll try to be careful here, to give, I guess, a little information on the premise and what happens in Limbo. This is the story about a guy named Clay. He's the protagonist, and he is in this town, or maybe I guess it's a city. It's called Didande, and I can't remember if we learned that in the first issue or the first chapter now in the trade, or if it's in the second. But he's in Didande, and he's not entirely sure how he got there or why he's there, but he's a detective. In the first chapter, he gets this strange phone call. He doesn't know who it's from. We as readers can't tell who it's from. And this is not the only time in this story that he gets a call and is unable to interpret it. He lives with a woman by the name of Sandy who practices a kind of, how would you call it, a musical voodoo?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, in that she listens to tapes and to music, specifically mixtapes, and is able to communicate with her Loa by doing so. So Clay is home one day, and he's visited by this very attractive woman named Bridget. And, a classic noir formula is that, she comes to him, she's in trouble. Bridget tells Clay, you got to help me, I have a problem. I work for this guy who is the city strongman. His name is The Thumb. And I sing at his club. I've seen something, though, that I probably shouldn't have seen, and he may or may not know, and I need for you to find out if the Thumb knows that I've seen what I think I've seen. And what she thinks she sees is in a room, her boss, the Thumb, and other men sitting around a television, and one character takes a goat toward the television, and the goat seems to be sucked into the television. It kind of freaks her out. And it does look freaky. Wijngaard's art does make this entire story have the kind of a surreal feel to it. And so that's what scares her. She goes to Clay, and then Clay begins investigating. And of course, again, in great noir fashion, he is sucked into a world he didn't expect to find. And in many ways, he is both, I guess he's both figuratively and literally sucked into the world in ways like the goat is sucked into the television set. But he does literally become sucked into a television set due to a character called the Teleshaman.
Yeah.
And we find out more about what the teleshaman's all about, his links to the thumb. There's more going on here. He ends up getting his friend Sandy involved. Sandy helps him out by tapping into her Loa, whose name is Papa Legba. Papa Legba. And then this includes other worldly characters, including, I think his name is Baron Saturday, and then his wife, whom I will not name because I think that's approaching spoiler territory. Mm-hmm. It gets strange. There is a group, kind of a hitman group of musicians, like skeleton musicians, called the Second Line, that if they come after you, you got to watch out for the snakes.
Yeah.
There is a race of humanoids called the Fishmen, and there is I don't know if I would call it a Cthulhu type character, but something a little like this called the Dagon or Dagon. I'm not sure. It's Dagon. So, part of it is this kind of swamp Louisiana voodoo inspired noir story. But there are big parts of it that remind me of the name of this movie, the David Cronenberg Videodrome. That's right.
Yeah.
It has that feel as well. So if you mix those two within a crime noir narrative, then you get a sense of what Limbo is like. Although that still doesn't go all the way of describing the experience of reading Limbo.
Yeah, it is so unique in so many ways, and Derek, we've probably all seen noir movies or shows
and we're both big fans of noir,
and we both love noir. So we've seen this general concept, or if you've got a protagonist, he's usually a detective, he doesn't remember some or all of what he's been through up to this point, but he knows there's something he's supposed to be doing. And as you said, in this case, Clay gets a phone call. It's mysterious. He thinks it might be somebody that can help him with his memories, but the local fishermen in the bar are so loud he can't think straight. A fight starts. A lot of noir starts with this type of situation, but like you said, it gets so unusual. I was reading an interview online with Wijngaard where he says the horror in this book is sort of like a combination of Big Trouble in Little China and Videodrome. And I know how you love those descriptions, Terry, those comparisons. But, it is because the Videodrome aspect of it, if you haven't seen the movie, is there's not a lot of light humor in Videodrome. It's pretty serious, and it's really, really strange. Big Trouble in Little China is a much more lighthearted story,
right? But
this really does a good job of putting both of those elements together. There are definitely some really nice comedic moments when it's obvious to us that Clay does not know some things that he should know and to be able to function in this world, but it's done with a humorous tone. But then, bam! Right after that, you're stuck in this deadly voodoo situation with snakes coming out of people's mouths and that type of thing. So you really can never get your feet grounded on where the story is, and I think that is a blessing, and it might also be a curse. I'm interested to hear what you think.
I think it's ultimately a blessing, although by the time I got to the end of Limbo, as much as I liked it, I still had a sense of incompleteness. Now I'm not asking for unequivocal endings. As I've said on this podcast many, many times, I'm someone who prefers open endings and ambiguity in my narratives. But I think with me and Limbo, what Waters was attempting to do with the writing is to throw in a lot. And I think that had he pared down some of the narrative elements and maybe, to use another metaphor, juggled fewer balls or tried to juggle fewer balls, it could possibly be a more satisfying story. And I'll give you an example here. The character, the protagonist, Clay, we learn, and this is not a spoiler because we find out something about this fairly early in the narrative. we figure out that he is someone who is unconscious somewhere, and that maybe the experiences that he's having, in other words, the story that we're reading, is the result of, I don't know, some kind of interior drama that's going on maybe inside of his head, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a question there that takes us to the very end of the narrative. You know, who is this person? How did he end up in the hospital? Why is he unconscious? Or to go even further, how did he get that way? And what kind of person he is? And in fact, this is a question that comes up multiple times in Limbo. And this is something that his friend Sandy is wanting to find out. You know, who is her friend Clay? You know, this person who apparently in another realm or another level is, and I use the word level purposefully, and I think we can get into that discussion in a moment. What did he do to land him in probably a hospital to where he's unconscious, he's hanging on to life, and he's having the experiences internally or in his head or psychologically or whatever this is that he's having? You know, was he a bad guy who got whacked and almost killed, or was he a good guy trying to save someone and got hurt in the process? What is it? We never do find out. And I think on the one hand, I like that we don't find out who the real Clay is. On the other hand, I was expecting a little more explanation, especially by the end, as to who this, for lack of a better term, real world Clay was all about, or at least a little more information about who he was.
You know, you bring up a really good point about Clay, because as soon as we see him for the first time in De Dante City, he's at this bar, and he's experiencing all of this strangeness with a very open mind. I mean, it doesn't really shake him. Or either it doesn't shake him or he doesn't really realize how crazy the situation is, because he seems to be very accepting of a lot of the stuff that's going on. Not like you or I would be. We would like, you know, what in the world's going on? But he seems to be kind of take it in stride, as if maybe some part of him has already been aware of this, and what you mentioned about, you know, where he actually might be. Really falls into this, and I don't want to get too much into that, but you know, he is kind of he seems to kind of mold himself into whatever is going on, no matter how weird it gets.
Exactly. You know, and I think, you know, you mentioned the city being Dodonde. In Spanish, that, and I'm sure it has to be this, a reference to de donde, D-E and then D-O-N-D-E, which means from where or where from. So, you know, I mean, that basically says everything about his situation, right? Where is he from? Who is he? What's going on here? And so there's a big question mark to who he is and his existence. But there are a lot of different question marks in this story that go beyond Clay. So, for instance, you know, we have the voodoo, the Loa, you know, his relationship with Sandy. How did they first meet? You know, what the hell is this teleshaman all about? You know, he's a shaman, but he's, you know, associated with television, therefore he's called a teleshaman. Mm-hmm. And then we have the Baron and his wife Maman, and who are these characters? I guess they're voodoo infused. Who the hell are these fishmen? I mean, yeah. Again, if this has this kind of voodoo, maybe Louisiana swamp feel to it, okay, fish, that makes sense. The fishmen, they're never really explained. Not that they absolutely have to be explained completely, but I wanted, I guess as with Clay, a little more explanation as to certain characters in this story, such as, you know, the Fishman or the Dagon, or the Dagon. You know, this Cthulhu maybe like characters. So I like the story, but I feel that maybe Waters and Wijngaard were trying to stuff too much in this 6-issue narrative or the 6-chapter trade.
They may have been, and you know, we've really said very little about the art style. And one of the things that makes this interesting is, you know, not only do we not know where we are, we don't really know when we are. A lot of what we see here is actually Bleeding Cool called this book a combination of neon and static. And there's a lot of neon in here, and it kind of reminds us of 80s style neon. And there are a lot of 80s, not direct references, but, you know, you have televisions from that time. You have VCRs, you have VHS tapes, you have mixtapes, that type of thing. So there's a real, it seems to be a real sense of an homage to the 80s, or maybe even slightly before that time, as far as when we are, although we can't really nail that down for certain. But the art itself is just it is very neon like. You got a lot of pinks and purples and yellows and things like that. The art and the colors are very, very well done. The colors and the art are done by Wijngaard, who has done some horror work previously, I think, on a title, Twisted Dark, and maybe another one from Think Comics. So, Derek, visually, it's a very interesting book to look at. And when you combine the story with that, this is a book that's kind of easy to get lost in. But like you mentioned, maybe there's too many things here for us to look at and consider.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the use of color and neon in Wijngaard's art. I really do enjoy the art in Limbo, and not only the use of color, but also some of these page spreads or these full pages where we see Clay sucked into the television, and we see him progressing through a variety of different television shows, or let's say television genres. And he's doing this in many ways that's similar to climbing between and among comics panels on the page. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was really clever. Another thing that I liked about this book, and I thought it was very ambitious, but again, I ultimately think they just brushed the surface of what they could have done here, is this issue of levels and television and existence, right? Mm-hmm. I mentioned a second ago that there are, 2 or 3 instances where Clay is being chased and he's inside the television. Either he, or at one point he and the teleshaman are being chased, and we see them making it suggests movement through television programs or channels, but also through various panels, and it's almost as if they're climbing or running from one panel to another in a way that doesn't necessarily jibe with the way that we read comics on a page. And I like that. I like that discrepancy in their movement and the pattern of reading traditionally in terms of comics. This whole thing of leveling, though, there is a page that I would have quote from here. I don't know if it's a key passage to Limbo, but I think it at least possibly is a key to understanding what's going on here with the way that Waters was trying to relate television and levels of existence here. Now, this takes place in the 4th issue, or I guess since we're talking about the trade, Chapter 4, where Clay has been captured by the Thumb, and he finds himself tied up in a room with television cameras. Mm-hmm. In television set. There are a few cameras and then various television sets. And Bridget walks in and he realizes, this is the woman he was supposed to be working for. Is she behind this? And so she comes in and she's telling him about he needs to think in terms of the levels, okay? Right. And she trains a camera on the television, and the effect is, I call it the Citizen Kane effect. You remember that famous scene in Citizen Kane where Charles Foster Kane toward the end is walking between two mirrors.
Two mirrors, right.
And you see this repetition of his image going into infinity. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought that that's a striking image, and not just in that movie. Andy, when I was growing up, my dad was a barber, so I spent a lot of my time in a barber shop that he worked at. And I was a shoe shine boy, and there were many times that there were no shoes to shine or no hair to sweep up or towels to wash. And so I would sit in one of the barber chairs. And this was a traditional men's barber shop. So there were these, classic barber chairs and then these really big mirrors on both sides of the room. Now, I would sit in one of the barber chairs and look at the mirror directly in front of me. And I could see in that mirror an image of me looking into the mirror, because there was a mirror behind me as well. Right. And I saw this image of me looking at myself in a mirror going, regressing infinitely. And it freaked me out as a kid. And,
it is a freaky thing, yeah.
And it does pose something like an existential crisis, I guess we can call this. Well, there's something kind of like that going on here. So in this fourth chapter, when Bridget comes into the room where Clay's being kept, she says, "See that? This nest of screens? Eternal, spiraling deeper but never getting any lower. The universe is micro. The universe is macro." And again, we see an image of a television set within a television set within a television set and infinitum. And then she says next, each screen creates the next, influences it. Each screen creates the next, influences its shape. Each is a symbol in a chain, just like the thoughts in your head. That looping network of input and deference that becomes so complex it turns in on itself, creating the most complex symbol of all, the I, the human mind. What if we remove the points of reference, all those memories, dreams, those symbols? Does the I still exist? Is I the same mind? Is it doomed to follow the same pathways down to the same ends? Is identity intrinsic, environmental, or just an illusion? And to me, this takes place a little more than halfway through the narrative. And, the middle is usually, I guess traditionally, one of the privileged places in a story. I don't know if they intentionally put this monologue in as a potential key to understanding thematically what's going on in Limbo or not, but that's the way I read it, that this is an important scene, because especially what she's saying here is just so damn heavy.
Yeah. And I don't want listen. I think that's a great section to bring out, because it does focus a lot on, like you said, I think the key to understanding it is probably located in that passage and others like it. But listeners might think, oh man, this is a really wordy book. It's really not. It's really not that text heavy. That's just one of the places where there's, like you said, there's quite an extended monologue, but I think it's a very important monologue. But there really aren't that many places like that. But again, like you said, I think that stands out because the focus seems to be, this is important. But yeah, it is an important section.
Yeah, it is. And, as you said, this is not an overly wordy comic. It's definitely not. In fact, much of the story is told visually. Getting back to, we were talking about Wijngaard's art. And I think it goes a long way of really propelling the narrative. Yeah.
I really like this book, Derek. I definitely want to see what these guys come up with next. And I hope that readers will take a chance on Limbo. I mean, it's all self-contained. All 6 issues are collected there and this is coming to us from Image Comics. So I hope readers will take a chance on this. If what we have said has piqued your interest in the least amount, we hope you'll take a look.
Yeah, and especially if you didn't get on board with the individual issues, definitely pick up the trade, because it's well worth reading. And I know that, or I've read that Dan Waters and Caspar Wijngaard have worked together before doing other things, but this is the first time that this is the only thing that I know of that they've worked on together, but I think it's the first time that they have produced a comic for this broad an audience.
I think so.
Yeah. One thing I want to say about this story that kind of irked me before we leave it, and this is just a little thing, but I think it's important. Okay. Now, we mentioned that mixtapes become important in this story, but also videotapes are very important visually and thematically. You were making a reference to the 1980s, and of course, videotapes were a big part of that as well. And anytime something is put visually on record, it's on a videotape, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. If that's the case, then why in the very last chapter of this book, chapter 6, what originally was issue number 6, in the final confrontation between the Thumb, Bridget, and then other characters, and I don't have a page number here, because I don't think that I'm looking from a PDF, and there are no page numbers.
There aren't page numbers in the book.
Yeah, but this is a scene in that last chapter where Bridget is confronting the Thumb, and they're in a room where there's a wall of screens. And he's talking, and we've, seen all of these references to videos. There's even a direct reference that the Thumb makes to videotape. Mm-hmm. What is he holding in his hand? Did you notice that?
Now, you're talking about when he's standing on the pile of TVs?
This is,
or before that?
this is I don't know if he's standing. This is when Bridget walks into a room with a pile of TVs, and he's sitting in that room, and he has something in his hand. He's talking to Bridget about videotape, but he's holding in his hand celluloid film, not videotape. And he's talking about he says, I heard you on the security tape, and somehow it made a kind of sense. You know, there are some who believe that by cutting up tape and splicing it together in different ways, one can affect reality itself, reshape it to one's will through a kind of empathic mimesis. I had a man who could dance through screens like they were doorways, but for the rest of us, what we see on videotape is not real. It happens beyond the glass on different levels of reality, ever present but unbreachable. Okay, so he makes multiple references to tape, to videotape, but yet we see him holding it in his hand as he's saying this, film.
Yeah, it's clearly film. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, was this just it's kind of an obvious oversight, but an oversight nonetheless, on the creator's part? It just seemed that momentarily took me out of the story. And this is an important part of the story. I was really involved at this point. I was sucked in, so to speak, in ways similar to the way that Clay is sucked into television sets. And then I saw the celluloid, and I thought, wait a minute, he's talking about videotape. That's not videotape in his hand. Why did they do that? And so I momentarily stepped out of the story. I was able to get back in, but that's something that kind of annoyed me a bit.
Yeah, it does. It does. On the surface, it doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense, but I know that it must be there for a reason, and maybe on subsequent reads, it will emerge.
Well, Andy, on the topic of things kind of and kind of not making sense, let's turn to the second title that we're going to be looking at today, and that is Fred Van Lente and Guiu Vilanova's Weird Detective, issue number 1. This is come out from Dark Horse Comics.
Yes, and this issue of Weird Detective number 1 is subtitled The Stars Are Wrong. And this is actually a double-sized comic. This is a 52-page comic, and as Derek said, written by Fred Van Lente, art by Vilanova, and colors by Mauricio Wallace and Yosan Gonzalez. And we have a really, really nice opening at the beginning of this comic. It's a quote from H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. And it starts, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the ability of the mind to correlate all its contents. Now, the rest of that quote, I think, is not put in the book, but is significant, where Lovecraft goes on to say, we live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality. And it goes on and on. I think that if you know the quote and you know what comes next, it might make Weird Detective number 1 make a little bit more sense. But it's not necessary that you know it. So in our opening scene here, we see these children playing in and around a swimming pool, and very, very soon they are horrified to discover a body at the bottom of the pool. Now, we have a narrator speaking through text boxes about what's happening scientifically when we use our senses. And I really like, Derek, the way that this is done by Vilanova, showing us a close-up of an eye with an arrow pointing, signifying the sense that's being used in this boy in the opening panel. And later he does that with other senses as it goes on.
Like an ear for hearing and fingers for touching.
Exactly. And we get the sense that we're actually being instructed by someone who knows far more than we do about our own senses. And in a way, this is true. This helps explain somewhat, at least early on, what's going on with this weird detective named Sebastian Green. And so Green is coming up to investigate this death at the bottom of the swimming pool. And one cop asks another, "He for real?" And the other one says, "Don't mind Green. He's from Canada." and there's all these Canadian jokes that are kind of running through here. And another cop, Green's about to approach, and one cop says, "This one's messed up, even by your standards." So we get the feeling early on that Green is this kind of maybe an oddball detective, but really we have no idea. He's really, really odd, and we learn more about him. He also is meeting a new partner, a woman named Sana Fayez. And Green doesn't like having a partner, but the central office of the police force has determined that there will be no more lone wolfing, which Green is apparently used to doing. And the really, really interesting thing is he can literally read her memories and discovers that Fayez's real assignment is not so much the murder, but to learn as much as she can about Green. And as we go, Green makes some discoveries while working on the case. One in particular, and Fayez thinks that she's really made a big assist in helping him with the case, but Green really is in total control of what's going on here. And at first, she really does not know what she's dealing with here.
Right. This is another one of these narratives. I mentioned at the top of the show that even though all three of these books that we're looking at this week are different and distinct in their own ways, we can link them in a variety of manners. They all deal with crime. They're all noir, and especially Limbo and Weird Detective. They're strange narratives. They take the crime or noir genre or form of storytelling and inject it with other generic elements. Here we have Lovecraftian horror, obviously. But I think another similarity between Weird Detective and Limbo is that there are things that go on in this story that even in the middle, before we get to the end, you and I shouldn't talk about because I would consider that spoiler, right?
Right.
Because there's a lot more that we could say about Sebastian Green, but we will refrain from doing so. And I was surprised that we found out something interesting about Green in the middle of this issue and not at the end. I mean, I think it worked out well. I was just a little surprised to learn it before the end. But it does go a long way of explaining this unusual ability that Green has. Because at one point, I think it's the chief of detectives is, talking with Detective Fayez, and says, I want you to follow Sebastian Green and learn as much as you can about him, because up until not too long ago, he was just, an average detective, getting by, doing okay work, but nothing outstanding. But then, a couple months ago or so, all of a sudden he started to become super detective, and we don't know why there was this change. Mm-hmm. Now, we as the reader, once we get halfway through this story and there's somewhat of a reveal, I guess, that we will not say, it goes a long way of explaining why Green is the way he is now. But yeah, I mean, that he is unusual, although, as you pointed out, comedically, he explains it by saying, "I'm different because I'm Canadian."
Right. And that, you would think that might be a running joke that gets to be pretty tired pretty soon, but it really doesn't. I mean,
it's a running joke, but it doesn't get tiring.
Yeah, it really doesn't get tired. And I think we can credit that to Fred Van Lente, who is always interesting, is never predictable, and is always engaging. I mean, there's just enough comedy in the book to keep what else is going on from really overwhelming us, because the rest of the book is pretty dark. I mean, anytime you approach, Lovecraftian proportions here, unless you're doing something that's just a, send up, it's going to be pretty dark.
Yeah, because this first case that they get when they, find this, I wouldn't even call it a body in the swimming pool. I mean, basically it is skin with clothes on.
Yeah.
And of course there's hair, but everything inside has been sucked out. So there's no blood, there's no organs, there are no bones, nothing. It's just whatever happened to this woman sucked everything outside of her, leaving her with only her skin and what she had been wearing.
Yeah, it's pretty freaky. And there are some other things that happen in the issue subsequently that we won't go into that are also pretty freaky. And this is great because this is going to appeal to noir fans and horror fans too, in a different way that Limbo would appeal to them.
Right.
I think this is more, obviously this is Lovecraftian horror, but I think it's more, I wouldn't call it gross out horror because it's really not that, but it is definitely supernatural horror.
Yeah. Again, this is Lovecraftian. It's more than a tip of the hat to weird fiction. And it's just strange. I was thinking about what I could say about another strange crime that takes place. Let's just say that it involves a toilet. Okay. And it is at least as weird as the woman whose insides were sucked out in some way.
Yeah.
And then somehow ended up in the pool because they had to figure out how this skin with clothes on it ended up in the pool. There's a lot of weird things going on here. And you're right. This is a double-sized issue, so this is a good chunk of story. And I can't remember how many issues Weird Detective is going to be.
I was going to ask you about that, if this is going to be an ongoing or if it's going to be a limited series.
I think initially it's probably limited. I've already seen that Amazon has listed the trade Weird Detective coming out, at least as of now, in February of 2017. So at least this story arc, if there's going to be more, this is, I guess, the first story arc, is going to be wrapped up before February. Now, is this the kind of story to where we can expect different installments, maybe a second narrative arc? Who knows? I can't really tell at this point, but but I can't remember how many issues this is going to be. And I'm sure that when we noted this a couple months back on a preview show, that information was there, but I've just forgotten. But this is interesting, and I am glad that they gave us a double-sized issue because we're looking at about, 46, 48 pages, so it's a good chunk of story.
Yeah, and Fred Van Lente keeps it moving. I mean, there's something interesting textually and visually happening on every single page. I mean, there may not be, supernatural things going on every single page, but there's something of interest that keeps the story moving. And Fred Van Lente is so good at that. His writing is never static. It's always moving forward. He's always keeping you engaged. He's always keeping you thinking. And so he does such a great job with that. But, I also wanted to tip my hat to Vilanova for the artwork also being engaging too. We didn't really mention this on Limbo, but there's probably no two pages that have the same panel layout on that book. And I think we can definitely say that here with Weird Detective #1. No two pages look the same. The panel layout is not only interesting, but it just allows the eye to move in a very quick fashion, but not so quick that you're going to lose elements of the story.
Oh, exactly. I don't know of other things that Vilanova has done. Do you?
He has done some work on the newish Twilight Zone series that's been out for a few years, and he's done some work on Dark Shadows.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, but other than that, I'm not sure what else he has done.
Yeah, well, I don't think he's near as experienced in comics as Fred Van Lente is. I mean, that guy is a master writer because he's done so many things. And in fact, we interviewed Van Lente a little over 2 years ago. He is probably best known, at least for me. This is how I was first introduced to him, through Action Philosophers. And then he did that one issue of Action Presidents. I don't know if they've gone beyond one yet, that one issue dealing with George Washington. If they have, I haven't read a second issue of Action Presidents. He also did that great book, Comic Book Comics. He did Brain Boy, and I think we had him on the show around the time, or maybe right after he had done Brain Boy. But he's also done a lot for Marvel, and most recently Valiant. He's done a lot of Valiant work. So, he's all over the place. And so, when you were talking about the well-written nature of Weird Detective #1, I mean, that's why, because, this is an experienced writer.
Yeah, I think this is probably the best written book that we're looking at today.
Yeah.
He like you said, he's been around a while. He can do anything. He's just a multi-talented writer. So when you pick up a book by Fred Van Lente, you're going to be in good hands. And he certainly delivers a great story.
Yeah. And, one of the things I particularly appreciated about this first issue of Weird Detective, and I think this is in the second half, this is a scene where we see Sebastian Green. He's at home, and he's doing a little research, learning about detectives. Different detectives and what they do.
Yeah, that's great.
And we see a series of panels where he's investigating what I can see, 4 classic detectives. And 2 of them I got really excited about. He is looking up Sherlock Holmes, Sam Spade, Jim Rockford, and Lenny Briscoe from Law & Order. And it was the Jim Rockford and Lenny Briscoe that really got me excited. I mean, anybody can reference Sherlock Holmes and Sam Spade. How many times, especially in terms of detective narrative, do you see references to Jim Rockford and especially Lenny Briscoe?
Right. It just doesn't happen. I mean, like you said, the first 2 are givens. I mean, Sherlock Holmes and Sam Spade are there. I mean, It's just it's a no-brainer. But it's really nice to see those other two guys there. Yeah.
Now, the one thing about this first issue that had me scratching my head, and I still can't figure it out, but I'm hoping that the following issues will explain things to me. And that is the Lovecraftian element that comes up in relation to the Anzio family. Now, we really haven't talked about Reina Anzio. Reina Anzio is someone who is involved in a tragedy. And again, we won't go into detail here. This has something to do with the aforementioned toilet. And if you read the issue, you'll know what we're referring to here, but we don't want to give away too much. No. But the Anzio family in this story are a big crime family. And at one point toward the end of this first issue, the father, Anzio, has someone tied up. And, the father of the son who was dating his daughter, Reina. And he's threatening the father. His name is Nunez, the father. And he's mentioning that he and his family, they're not happy. And he says, and it's not just me that's unhappy, it's other members of the family. And we see this weird creature, aquatic fish-looking type creature, creep toward Nunez. Okay, that's a kind of creature that seems similar to, what we could imagine out of Lovecraft. I don't know why that Lovecraftian part is associated with Anzio. I can understand why the Lovecraftian element of this first issue is associated with Sebastian Green. But maybe this will be explained in subsequent issues. I mean, that kind of threw me. I didn't know what to make of that.
Yeah, that was definitely unexpected and maybe not quite out of left field, but maybe, like you said, we are not privy to that information in this issue.
Right.
But maybe subsequent issues we will.
Yeah. Yeah. And if that's not explained in subsequent issues, that's a flaw.
Yeah. I get a feeling it's going to be explained.
Oh, yeah.
But I really like this. And, this is, and again, not comparing book to book, but, there's weirdness in Limbo and there's weirdness in Weird Detective, hence the title. But the weirdness in this book is handled really, really well. We can see what's going on, even though we don't understand it and we don't have our hands on every bit of it in this, just like we certainly don't in Limbo. There's so much that we might miss the first time. I think you can get most of it the first time here with Weird Detective, but there's so many other reasons, good reasons to go back and reread this. There's just a lot of stuff in here. I mean, again, these guys pack a lot of material into 52 pages.
Right. And I think we can say this of both Weird Detective and Limbo, is both of them are stories that have well-handled weirdness.
Yes, definitely.
The third title we're going to be looking at is not near as weird as the other two, but it is nonetheless a noir narrative. This is the first issue of Control, written by Andy Diggle and Angela Cruickshank, with art by Andrea Mutti. This is the first of a 6-issue series or miniseries, and I think that this is going to be something that is potentially ongoing, because if you look in the inside with the publishing information, it says 1 of 6, control number 1, volume 1. Mm-hmm. So if they're, why would they say this is volume 1 if they're not thinking even loosely of a volume 2?
I hope there will be a volume 2 because I really enjoyed it. This is in a similar manner to the other 2 books. This is a noir story, but this does not have any supernatural elements in it, at least in this very first issue. The way Control starts out is we begin in Washington, D.C. It's a stormy night. And
classic way of beginning a story. It was a stormy night.
It was a stormy night.
Yeah,
and it was dark and stormy.
Yeah, I think of Snoopy typing out on top of his doghouse.
So the first image we see beyond that is we see a guy that is it looks like he's about to be hanged. He's got a rope around his neck. He's in this really seedy apartment, standing on a chair, just barely hanging on. And the character in there says, "I guess you already know where this ends for you, in a deep hole in the ground. Only thing you control is how you get there, quick or slow." And so there's this guy that's being questioned at the end of a rope. And you can tell that things are not going too well for him. And in the midst of this, there are some cops that come to the door. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens there, but we do have 2 detectives who are investigating what's going on here. A guy named Mitch and his partner Kate. They've been detective partners for 3 years. They get called to investigate this certain situation. And Derek,
I think I can
go ahead and say, what happens?
Spoiler.
Yeah. It's not really that much of a spoiler because it happens really, really early. They investigate this. They get in a shootout with the guy that was trying to pump this other guy for information. And Kate's partner, Mitch, gets shot and killed by the guy that's doing the interrogating. So we've already got an officer down, and we've got a guy that's killed a cop, and he has gotten away. Again, this is not much spoiler because it's right here in the very beginning. Also, a very other important storyline is that of Senator Robert Brady's Citizens Privacy Bill of Rights. That's in the news, so we know that's going to be very important later as the story goes on. Well, of course, Kate has lost her partner in the shootout, so she has to explain to her Captain Yates, what happened, how she's handling this situation, and somebody's got to figure out, number 1, what happened, and number 2, where did the guy go that we're looking for. So we've pretty much got a classic, detective, hard-boiled noir story going on here that looks somewhat typical in the beginning, but I think the way that it's handled is not typical.
Right. Now, you mentioned a second ago that in the setup we get a reference to Senator Robert Brady, and he is trying to put through legislation that's called the Citizens Privacy Bill of Rights. And this takes place, or we find out this information after that initial scene, right, where this mystery guy is interrogating the guy that he's about to kill, or he thinks he's about to kill, right? He has him hanged. He's about to hang him. And then we cut to a bar with a pool room, and this is where we see Kate and Mitch. They're relaxing, they're shooting pool, but they're on the television. It says something about Senator Robert Brady and the Citizens Privacy Bill of Rights. Now, I wouldn't have thought much about that initially, but then at the very end, and I won't give it away what's at the very end, we're reintroduced to Senator Brady. And so I think that that's a great way of anticipating or setting up the ending in something that seemed like almost background or throwaway information toward the beginning. Now, I won't say what happens at the very end when we see Senator Brady. I will mention, though, that it explains the ball gag on the cover of this first issue.
Yeah,
because the first issue, it's a gun, a ball gag, and women's panties, or looks more like a thong, of the American flag.
Yeah, we should probably just leave it at that.
Yeah,
but Derek, the thing that got me was, I was like, okay, where have I heard this before? And I did a little research, and I probably should be more up to date on my current events. But I found out that President Obama introduced a consumer privacy Bill of Rights, not a citizens privacy Bill of Rights, but a consumer privacy Bill of Rights in 2015, protecting consumer data and how it is disseminated. So, I mean, this is quite a timely thing that they're focusing on here. That that's not the prime focus of the comic, but I think it's an important element. And as you said, it comes back at the end.
Yeah, or it's not a prime component yet.
Not yet, but
it may be, right?
Because we know that it might be,
right? Because apparently, from what I can gather, the Citizens Privacy Bill of Rights is a bill put forth to protect the privacy of citizens. In other words, it will limit what the media thinks should be known to the public about a person's private matters.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And that's really interesting how this comes back at the end, and we'll just leave it at that. I think that this is a great story. As you mentioned, there's nothing weird in this like Weird Detective and then Limbo. I think of the three noir narratives that we're looking at this week, this is the one that's the more traditional, straight up noir crime story. Although, if I had to mix it with any other genre or subgenre, it's political thriller, or at least it has the potential to become a political thriller. And the fact that this takes place in Washington, D.C., I think tells us that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was going to say, for fans of criminal, you're probably going to really dig this, although it is probably a little bit more law enforcement focused than criminal is. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to like that if you like criminal. There is quite a bit of police procedural things going on. So if you're into that, you're really, really going to dig this. So many things are done, Derek, I think really, really well. One of the things that I like a lot is the way that character is developed. There is a great scene on, we don't really have page numbers. I think it's like on page 15, where Kate has just been talking to Captain Yates, and Captain Yates is telling her, we don't really have time to discipline you for leaving your partner behind, even if it was for a few seconds. So here's what we're going to do. We're asking you to continue on this case. And she leaves the office, and there's a scene at the top of, I think it's page 16, where everybody else on the station floor is staring her down. She's just come out of the office, and there's a mixed reaction to Kate, and we soon learn she's got her supporters on the floor and she's got her accusers.
Right.
And she's got to work with all of them. And I really, really like the way that Andy Diggle and Angela Cruickshank tie this in. That gives her a lot of character. We learn so much more about Kate just after she leaves that room, and we learn so much about the other supporting characters without getting bogged down. I really like the way that came across.
Yeah. I also like the fact that what I'm assuming will be the other major character, detective character here, and this is Detective Doherty. He's not introduced until, I think, into the second half of this first issue. There's a reference to him in that scene where you mentioned where the chief is talking with Kate. She mentions that someone from the 2nd District is going to come over and assist, and that's who this is. Doherty, he's supposed to be, a crack detective, and we're introduced to him. I'm sure he'll play a much larger role in the issues to come, but we don't see much of him in this first issue.
Yeah, it's really more of an introduction to him. I think this is really Kate's story for all practical purposes, at least in this first issue. But I do look forward to seeing more of Daugherty, because he does look like he's an interesting character. Again, we don't get as much about him as we do about Kate.
Yeah. The one thing, I mentioned earlier that, I liked Limbo, but there was that one scene with the celluloid visual reference that took me momentarily out of the story. There was a similar thing going on in this first issue of Control. And this also takes place during that aforementioned scene where Chief Yates is talking with Kate. And she mentions that someone from the 2nd District is going to be coming over. And this is the way she says it, okay? She says to Kate, the chief does, the case is yours, the squad is yours, but as we're short, 2nd District are sending over one of their own to assist. From what I just read, did anything seem askew to you?
It just seemed a little too scripted.
No. 2nd District are sending over one of their own. Now, This takes place in Washington, D.C. We're dealing with U.S. police officers. And Yates is saying 2nd District are sending over one of their own. Okay. The collective noun, the 2nd District, in U.S. English, it should be 2nd District is sending over one of its own. Uh-huh. So it's singular instead of plural. Here we have plural. Well, Andy Diggle is a writer from the UK.
That's right.
This is just one of those things that an editor should have picked up on. Now, if this were a procedural taking place in the UK, no problem. But it's not, and it's not dealing with characters who are from Britain. No, it's taking place in DC. These are American detectives. That momentarily took me out of the story because I thought, wait a minute now, that should be singular and not plural. But I guess that's the...
You're the English guy, too.
Yeah, it's coming out.
But no, I thought you meant maybe a plot point. But
no.
I was going to go with you there.
Yeah, it was the grammar. But no, otherwise, I think this is a great story. But then again, I expected this to be a great story. Andy Diggle has done a lot of these types of stories in the past, dealing with crime that have a noir feel to them. We've talked about several of his books before. He's done Thief of Thieves. He also did that miniseries Snapshot from a few years ago. He did a run on Hellblazer, on Daredevil. He did an issue of 100 Bullets. And he also was the guy behind The Losers. Mm-hmm. So, this guy knows how to write crime and noir narrative. So I really love the story. But also, Mutti's art is great here. And we've talked about Mutti in the past. He most recently... he did, along with Brian Wood, the series Rebels. Yeah. And then didn't you and I, about 2 years ago, review that first issue of The Returning?
Yes, he did that.
He was the artist on that.
Yeah, we only looked at the first issue, but he was the artist on that.
Yeah.
He's also done some other stuff for Dynamite, too, I believe.
Yeah, he's done a lot of things, but I know that we've talked about... Yeah, The Returning and Rebels, the first issue of those when they came out. So it's great art and it's a great story. And, this is the one that, I enjoyed all three of these books, Limbo, Weird Detective 1, and Control 1. But among the three, Control number 1 I liked the most just because it was more straight detective noir.
I liked it too. Now, I do have a not really a quibble with the ending, and again, we don't want to talk too much about the ending, but I maybe the ending is just a little too fantastic, maybe not. It sure gets your attention, and it sure makes you want to pick up the next issue, which is the point. That's what the creators want. I don't know. I thought it was too much of not a gotcha moment. You know what I mean? But
almost cliche.
Almost. It works. I can't deny that it works, and I can't deny that it will hook you into buying the next issue, which you should. I don't know. I was kind of like, I don't know. I'm mixed about the ending, and the ending works. I don't know.
It wasn't unexpected.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of my. I wouldn't even say a misgiving. I'm being really, really picky on it because I really, really do like the issue, and for all the reasons that you mentioned, and also because it is, as we said, the only one does not have any supernatural element. So fans of crime fiction, noir comics are really going to like this.
Right. And, you've referenced early on Brubaker's Criminal series. And one of the great things about Criminal that I absolutely loved and still do because they continue to come out every now and again with a criminal story is that Brubaker has created this larger crime world, right? Yeah. And the different narrative arcs in Criminal are self-contained stories, but they all take place within the same world. And you will have characters kind of cross over between and among some of the various storylines. So I like that. And I'm wondering if Control is going to be something similar because, as the copyright page indicates, this is Volume 1.
Yeah.
So I wonder if Volume 2 will still take place in this world, maybe not dealing with the same characters, Kate and Doherty, but maybe other detectives in DC. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it could be the type of thing, like you said, that Brubaker does with his series. And when I first got into criminal, the guy at the comic shop was telling me about. He says, okay, now this character here, the bartender, he's got an important role to play, or he's got an okay important role to play here, but he's a major player in this other series. Like you said, there's so much connection, and I would love to see some of the connections here because, again, it's not much of a spoiler, but Mitch here gets knocked off really early in the book. But he seems like he would be a really cool character to read his backstory or maybe some of his other cases. So it would be kind of nice to have a little control type of universe going on like Brubaker has with his criminal universe.
Yeah, so maybe the next volume or a future volume would take place before the events in this first volume, and we can find some, little more background information about Mitch.
Yeah, so guys, if you're listening, more control.
Yeah. I think all three of these we'd like to see more of. We started off with Dan Water and Caspar Wijngaard's Limbo. After that, we looked at issue number 1 of Weird Detective from Fred Van Lente and Guiu Vilanova. And then we wrapped up with issue number 1 of Andy Diggle, Angela Cruickshank, and Andre Mutti's Control.
Yeah, these were all really good books, and we hope you will check them all out.
And it's really good when the titles we decide to discuss for a particular week, they have something in common. And I know, Andy, over the past couple of weeks, when you and I were trying to decide, okay, what would we talk about this week? I think we started with Limbo. You had recommended Limbo, and then from there, when we were fishing around, we saw that the first issue of Weird Detective is going to be coming out this week, in fact, and then the Control number 1 came out just recently, but all three really work well together.
Yeah, they do, and I'm glad they had kind of a common element to bind them together, and you're probably going to want to pick up all three of them.
And I know a great place to pick up all three of those books and I guess subsequent issues of Weird Detective and Control, and that is from our sponsor. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. You can find great deals at Discount Comic Book Service. We use them, and we think you should too. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a message through SpeakPipe, which is very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up your phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you want to contact us by email, you can write us at 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or if you want to get in touch with us individually, I'm Wolverton at comicsalternative.com. And Derek, how about you?
I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn. You can now listen to us on Spotify, and if you're an Android user, on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as all of the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. And again, if you happen to be at Heroes Con, you can meet the two guys in person. And I hope that you guys will stop by. And I wish I was going to be there this time, but maybe next time.
Yeah, next time. And I do look forward to seeing many of our listeners at the con. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
We'll see you later.